So quiet, so I can do in confession. ¿Dónde está la música? Good evening, bienvenidos, and welcome to our 7th annual State of the Latino Community Address, Reimaging the Latinx Community Post-Pandemic in Sonoma County. I'm Herman J. Hernandez, Chairman of the Board of Cien, and trying to stay within my notes, but I need to just kind of share with you that it's an exciting moment for me. As I sit outside in my patio, you can see behind me and right on the other side of the fence is where the Wallbridge fire ended coming down from the north side. I'm not going to make reference to the other portion of our property that all burned, but thank God I had a home to come to. Thank God that I was able to sit here on the patio this evening to offer mi casa is su casa, and that I had a home to come to. I pray for all those that lost their homes. With that, it is truly a humbling moment and an honor to have all join us this evening for such a very important ongoing community conversation about equity, movement building, and the need for greater diversity and growth in Latino leadership, centered with the Cien scorecard with the call to action. Our forum this evening is presented by Cien Sonoma County in partnership with our premier partners, Redwood Credit Union, Kaiser Permanente, Community Foundation of Sonoma County, Luther Burbank Center of the Arts, Petaluma Health Center, and the Press Democrat. We are so thankful for your continued support in allowing Cien to continue to be a conveyor, connector, bridge builder, and bringing community together for deeper conversations. That will close the many community gaps and have more equitable actions in creating change. Remember, with all of you at the table, and for sure not on the menu. Yet, without our premier partners' continued support, this could never happen. Te mando un abrazo de mi corazón con muchas gracias. I send you a strong hug with a heartfelt thank you. As I continue my gracias to our Cien familia, I want you all to know you are all nuestro familia. Todos are at the mesa or the table. Todos are in the conversation or conversación. Todos, all of you, will make that difference in the changes of equity as it flows throughout our community. During these challenging times, many changes were needed for Cien in dealing with the pandemic. Moving from brick and mortar to the retooling on just how will Cien deliver their programs and messages. So on April 14th, we presented our first virtual program, and since then have now completed 14 more programs, where the program committee now produces one program every 2 weeks. Very impactful in strengthening our creating of awareness and really trying to open the valve for that flow of equity to enter and to be more firm in a foundation of our community. In order to do this, we needed to invest and work harder in bringing to Cien familia a stronger presentation of our programs presented virtual. So we created a virtual platform team with Ricardo Rivera, What's a Lab, in producing our virtual program by transmitting via Facebook, Zoom, and needed translations. We then created a partnership with KBBF 89.1 FM to take our programs deeper into the Latino communities. We then wanted to have more of the Cien conversation have the opportunity in reaching deeper in our Spanish-speaking community. So we partnered with Hannah Institute, where Betsy Chavez this evening is doing the translations. Translator brings that needed translation to fill the need. I also want to personally thank Jennifer Gray Thompson, Executive Director of Rebuild North Bay Foundation, for providing Cien the seed funding to create the virtual platform we are on this evening. Muchísimas gracias. I also want to acknowledge and thank other nonprofit organizations where Cien has created a platform for the conversation where their efforts align with Cien's scorecard of creating equity throughout our community. And for the following, the conversations and needed collaboration in creating a stronger voice at the table and within the community, creating awareness. I would like to thank our padrinos as our underwriters, which includes our premier partners. Thank you to the Federated Indians of Grayton Rancheria, Independent Office of Law Enforcement Auditor, Career Technical Education Foundation, La Tortilla Factory, Healthcare Foundation, Northern Sonoma County, Sonoma County Economic Development Board, Rebuild North Bay Foundation, KBBF 89.1 FM, Comcast, Bank of America, AT&T, and PG&E. Thank you again so much to our padrinos underwriters. Your additional support continues to make a major impact for our communities. As excited as I get and as excited as I am this evening, I need to share something very emotional with you. Next week, October 1st, will be the 11th anniversary of the founding of Cien. I can't tell you the hundreds of programs that we've had, the thousands of individual residents and that we've been able to reach out to, but it is an exciting moment to know that we will be entering our 11th year, never knowing that we would be a virtual, for now, program. Cien is blessed to continue to grow from a gathering of 7, and yes, in the back room of Mary's Pizza, to where we now outreach to well over 2,000. In addition, Cien continues to be to being a influence of supporting Latino leaders startup groups in Marin, Napa, Mendocino counties. It's creating a stronger Latino voice and presence in Northern California. Wow. Well, much of what will transpire this evening could not have been done without a tremendous State of the Latino committee. So I would like to give thanks to the whole committee, starting with co-chairs Sylvia Limos, Todd Mendoza, for their dedication, support, passion in organizing this evening program. And also a very special thank you to Oscar Chavez and Lenny Medina for the content of the program. Let's give them all a virtual big hand and a virtual hug. Y gracias al equipo. We all know a successful organization needs a strong working board of directors, and they need to stay strong for sure during these challenging times. Plus, to control me and keep me focused. I could have never asked for a better board of directors that I serve with. And not only that, the inspiration they give me to not only inspire me, but to give me the energy to move forward, to go on no matter what the situation and how difficult times might be given what we're experiencing today. So let me introduce the Cien Board of Directors that keep Cien strong y fuerte. Lisa Carreño is our vice chair. Sylvia Limos is our secretary. Todd Mendoza is our treasurer. And our board members of Pam Channer, Lenny Medina, Dania Candela, Adriana Arezon, Daniel Winsvig, Alegria de la Cruz, Elliot Enriquez, Hector Delgado, Carrie Fugit, Robin Seltzer, y Fernando Carrillo. Ladies and gentlemen, that is your Cien Board of Directors, one awesome board. And thank them, and thank you for tolerating me. Now, I would like to acknowledge our virtual political leaders and current candidates running for office that joined us this evening for the conversation. Cien is thankful for them making the time to better understand the Latino disparities and gaps so they can take the action needed to work with the community in closing those gaps. Gracias to all of you. And now, our casa to them, to all, is always open for you as a resource whenever you need it. I would like to now do shout outs of acknowledgements from Cien to our community that have strived to make a difference, not only in the Latino community, but the whole community. To the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors for the 7th consecutive proclamation of Latino Heritage Month from September 15th through October 15th. Yes, our 7th year of celebration in Sonoma County and our 7th year being virtual. Congratulations to the Luther Burbank Center of the Arts for their collaboration with Cien at the 7th annual Latino Cultural Experience, which had the largest number of views that any virtual program has to date. Thank you, Jose Soto, Director of the Mariachi Student Program, and to the awesome student performers. To the Press Democrat on the ongoing collaboration with Cien, creating 2 annual Press Democrat inserts, Latino Living and Latino Heritage, highlighting the importance of the Latino community and acknowledging those that do so much for their community. And the continuation of La Prensa Sonoma paper and online version. The County of Sonoma for the creation of the Equity Department and the appointment of new Equity Director, Alegria de la Cruz. Wow. We wish Alegria the best and that she know and the county know Cien is there to support. And lastly, just a bit ago, the Santa Rosa Junior College was just awarded a $3 million Hispanic Serving Institution grant for 5 years in providing Latinx and first generation support with financial aid, counseling, transfer services, plus academic and mental health services. Fantastic. At this time, I would like to introduce our host. And it is with great excitement and emotion to introduce him. Oscar Pardo is a well-regarded civil attorney in Sonoma County, practicing with Perry, Johnson, Anderson, Miller, and Moskowitz, LLP. He is a founding member of Cien and currently serves as the program committee co-chair. He received his BA degree from the University of California, Berkeley, double majoring in political science, political policy, and he went on to attend and graduate from the University of California, Los Angeles School of Law. Familia Cien, amigos, ladies and gentlemen, Oscar Pardo. Thank you. Great to see you all.
Thank you very much, Herman, for the introduction and your wonderful words. They always inspire all of us to keep on pushing further. I want to introduce our honorary speaker, Supervisor Susan Gorin. Susan Gorin, as you may know, has been a resident of Sonoma County for close to 40 years. She was a successful entrepreneur in the electronics industry before heading back to continue her education. She attended Santa Rosa Junior College and Sonoma State, where she graduated cum laude with a dual degree in political science and economics. There is no denying her commitment to the community. She has served on the Santa Rosa Planning Commission, the Board of Public Utilities, Santa Rosa City Council, and was mayor for 2 years in that dais. Elected to the Sonoma County Mayors and Council Members Association. And in 2012, she was elected to the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, where she represents the 1st District. She currently serves as the chair of the supervisors and has been a true friend of Cien. So, Supervisor Gorin, the floor is yours.
Gracias, Oscar, and thank you for welcoming me and inviting me to the conversation tonight. It's my honor to be here with you tonight. And Herman, I am so glad that your house survived the fire and that the firefighters were able to stop the fire just outside of your house. We give thanks to all of our first responders for the amazing job that they did in containing and minimizing the structural damage from the Myers and Walbridge fire. And we're so grateful that no one lost their lives in the fires this year. So I'm very excited that the loss was minimal, and want to wish everyone who did lose a house my very deepest sympathies. And I know that you know the journey that is before you. But I also wanted to say, Herman, thank you for wearing the mask that says vote across it. This election is so important now more than ever. And registering and participating in the census, the deadline is at the end of September, is vitally important to the health and well-being and financial assistance for all of us living in Sonoma County. So I'm delighted to be here, if virtually, through the 7th annual State of the Latinos in Sonoma County. I hope, like you hope, that next year we will be meeting together in SSU Ballroom and other venues, giving each other hugs and celebrating that our pandemic is over. But for right now, we're learning new skills about the virtual world through Zoom and so many other different media. Tonight's forum is titled Reimagining Sonoma County Post-Pandemic. And I want us to take a minute to really think about this. Let's think not of what we want our communities to look like after the pandemic is over. We don't even know when the pandemic will be over. But let's imagine what we want to change as we go through the pandemic. This community has been through so much over the last few years. There is a lot of hurt. There's also so much resilience. As a supervisor and chair of the Board of Supervisors this year, I can see how much progress we've made together. and how much our government has adapted to intently listen and respond to better serve the communities left behind by our own systems. After the 2017 fires, we learned to be more inclusive, to better respond, and hopefully to warn you of and evacuate you of the fires. The Kincaid fire last year and the LNU complex fires this year showed us that we indeed have learned how to prepare for and really take advantage of the lessons that we learned from our previous shortfalls, and we've moved forward as a community. But it doesn't mean that we stop here. It only means that we change, and adaptation is possible, and that it is during the times of crises and despair, like what we're going through right now, that change is accomplished. So I invite you to imagine what we want to change, enhance, or do better for our communities right now, not tomorrow. And I open the door for us to work together. Hold on a minute. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the over 200,000 people who have lost their lives due to the COVID-19 pandemic in our country, and the 120 deaths we have had here in Sonoma County over the past 6 months. Let us acknowledge too that currently 54% of the local COVID-19 cases are occurring within the Latinx community, even if they only represent over 25% of the total Sonoma County population. We can't turn around and avoid looking at the impact this pandemic has generated among our very own Latinx and Indigenous communities who've taken the brunt of it while still putting food on the shelves, while still producing wine that Sonoma County is known for, while putting their own lives at risk while working at hospitals and senior care facilities, or while working without a break to ensure those who most need assistance receive it. To the many community organizations that have collaborated with the county or even take it upon themselves to support the community when we need it most, thank you. I would also like to share that thanks to your efforts, we now have a fully established Office of Equity led by Alegria de la Cruz, the former Chief Deputy Counsel for Sonoma County, who was appointed by the Board of Supervisors this week to be our first permanent director of the Equity Office. Congratulations to Alegria. The County Board of Supervisors recognizes the powerful role that local government can play to unseat racial inequity through the development of new and intentional policies, programs, and legislation regarding housing, social services, health services, justice, law enforcement, and even recreation. Even before this office was officially established, the Department of Health Services established the Latinx Health Workforce Group in an effort to bring an equity lens to our emergency response. Facilitated by Alegria and key leadership staff from our health department, the work group designed a project and released a request for proposals to address underlying inequities and ultimately reduce the COVID-19 infection and transmission in the Latinx and Indigenous language-speaking communities. This project has been awarded to the nonprofit group On the Move. We know very well that the impacts of COVID-19 in our community are not only health-related, but this virus has also affected our education system, housing security, and the ability for low-income families and communities of color to bring food to the table at their own homes. Thank you, Cien, for creating this space where even through a pandemic, fire recovery process, and the immense despair many of us feel, you bring us back to the table to ask ourselves, How can we continue to push forward to raise the bar for our Latinx community? Thank you. As we look to the scorecard this year and how much there is left to do, I invite you to continue to motivate us, and I thank you for pushing forward and not letting up, for caring so much. Our panelists will later engage in the discussion that we're really looking forward tonight on how we do move forward. And it's very exciting to know that you are such an important part of our community. So thank you again. You continue to motivate us, and I thank you for pushing forward, for not letting up, for caring so much. So our panel tonight will talk about affordable home ownership and the laws that impact it. This pandemic has shown us that the community well-being can only be achieved when all community members have access to dignified health care, a safe home, to jobs with fair wages and benefits, and when the color of your skin does not determine the likelihood of you getting COVID-19 and the many repercussions that come after that. If there's any silver lining about this pandemic, it's that it's shown us so undeniably how the subtle inequities and racial bias in our system can directly and greatly impact our communities. Thank you all for raising your voices to say how unacceptable this is. I also want to share that the county has increased its capacities around communication to the Spanish-speaking community. All of our social media, press releases, alerts, and community updates for all emergencies, including COVID-19 and fires, are now in Spanish as well as English. In fact, the community updates with Dr. Mace are simultaneously translated in Spanish with a link for the public on the county Facebook page every Wednesday. As a white woman, I will never fully understand the challenges and pain that our community members of color face daily, but I can educate myself to better understand what my role is in this society, what it can be, and what my role as an ally and accomplish for change should be. Thank you for pushing this community as a whole to be better, and for pushing me as an individual along the way. I remember meeting with a number of you at Mary's Pizza. You never let up. Thank you for not letting me turn my face and our faces to conduct business as usual. This is no time for businesses as usual. This is time to detach from the systems of the past and create a society that is inclusive, equitable, and that elevates the diverse contributions of all of our community members. Thank you, thank you. Buenas noches, los Cien members and community. We are with you. Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you so much, Supervisor Gorin, for your inspirational and insightful words. We really do appreciate you coming here to speak to us. We also do appreciate all the efforts that the county has made to make inroads, to collaborate with the Latino community on so many levels. The Office of Equity, one example, the Latinx Healthcare Work Group, another example. We look forward to continue this work. Thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So everybody, we are now going to start moving into the panel discussion. And before we get started on the panel discussion, I want to make you aware of a couple of logistical things here moving forward. At the bottom of your Zoom, if you are attending via Zoom, you will see a chat and you will see a Q&A section. Feel free to put your questions as we're moving through the panels in there. We have folks that are looking through all the questions to make sure that we try to cover as many questions as possible. We also have an interpretation function at the bottom of the Zoom. It's a little globe. If you need Spanish interpretation for the remainder of this program, click on that globe and you will have a Spanish interpreter at your disposal there. This program is also being transmitted on Facebook Live, and it's also being transmitted on KBBF. So we hope that you can join us in any one of those platforms for this discussion. So we'll start with the first panel here today. We're talking about housing. And one of the things that we all know is that there's just not enough of it and it's not affordable. So let me start with this introduction moving forward. I'll begin with this discussion by providing a truncated timeline on the housing dilemma that may be unique to Sonoma County. Most everyone acknowledges that California has had decades of long housing crisis, generally impacting the socioeconomically disadvantaged, but striking with brute force against the Latino community. The underlying systemic factors are generally quantified by redlining housing practices, which oftentimes exclude Latinos and other minority communities from qualifying for mortgages, depressed wages that tend to cause displacement, inflated home prices, which tend to make home ownership unattainable, and a reduced housing stock. Now, all these factors have been operating in California for decades, but in Sonoma County, and it was touched upon by Supervisor Gorin and our President Herman Hernandez, we have another set of issues that sit on top of all of this. And that has been the series of catastrophic events that we had that have multiplied these systemic factors exponentially. And they include the 2017 Tubbs fire that destroyed more than 5,000 single-family homes in the Mark West, Rincon Ridge, Fountain Grove, and Coffee Park areas. That was followed the next year by the 2018 West County floods, which affected the West County, Guerneville, and all its surrounding areas and affected housing stock there. That was followed the next year by the 2019 Kincaid fire, which did not destroy many structures, but created a lot of smoke damage that made homes in areas like Windsor and Geyserville and Hillsburg uninhabitable. And finally, next year, this year, 2020, the Wallbridge fire, the Hennessy fire. More houses burnt, less stock to deal with. Within this framework, we bring to you two distinguished panelists that will provide their insight on what they believe are the systemic factors frustrating or prohibiting Latino and other socioeconomically disadvantaged communities from attaining home ownership and provide solutions that we may consider to reshape Sonoma County. Our first speaker is going to be Jennifer Lazar. She is founder and CEO of Lazar Development, Lazar Development Consultants, and founder of the Global Policy Leadership Academy, two firms working together to grow thriving, healthy, and vibrant communities. Ms. Lazar combines a background of more than 3 decades in community development, real estate development, and investment banking with a deep working knowledge of ecosystem change management and organizational strategy. She works to support clients in achieving impactful and scalable solutions to today's most vexing policy challenges, including addressing our global housing affordability crisis and ending homelessness in the United States. Ms. Lazar received her BA in Real Estate and Finance and MA in Urban Planning from UCLA, go Bruins, received her BA from Bryn Mawr College in Political Science and Economics, and she's completed the executive program in social entrepreneurship at Stanford Graduate School of Business, where she's also a visiting lecturer and at the university and teaches solutions to California's housing crisis. Welcome, Ms. Lazar.
Thank you, Oscar. And if you can't hear me, please let me know. Let me just start by thanking Cien and the Planning Committee for having me. Gracias a todo. It's really an honor to be here. As I shared with Oscar yesterday, I've actually been working in Napa County for nearly 15 years with both the city and the county, and more recently in the last 4 or 5 years with Sonoma County with the CDC, with Jennifer Thompson at Rebuild North Bay. And I was in Sonoma 3 times during the 2017 fires and into early 2018, seeing various stages of the recovery. So it's really an honor to be here, and I welcome the opportunity to be in conversation with all of you and with my colleague Jennifer Hernandez. So we get to be on panels together, and it's a lot of fun. So I just want to give, I have a few slides just to really sort of frame a conversation for us and open it up, and then again want to save most of the time for your questions and conversation. But if we could start the slides, Ricardo, thank you so much. Let's see. Okay, perfect. So I actually, in talking with Oscar, I really sort of wanted to get to the point, and I wanted to talk about the state of Sonoma County and the solutions to the disparity in Latino or Latinx home ownership, which is one of the indicators on your scorecard. Ricardo, that looks very, very small. Perfect. Okay, so I just took a quick snapshot of your scorecard, and I'm going to give sort of a framework for how you move to think about addressing this disparity. But what we really see, and I think we're really trying to change, are two things. A home ownership rate in the Latino community of 38% compared to 60% across the county. And of course, underlying a part of that, and not all of it by any means, is the differential in household income, $59,000 for Latino families and $72,000 for households in general. Next slide. So I teach the Housing Policy Leadership Academy across California to influencers and leaders. And we have developed a framework that actually started with work Jennifer Hernandez and I did in 2018 and 2019 when she was part of the CASA process through MTC, looking at how to address the housing crisis across the 9 North Bay counties. And I was the facilitator there. And that resulted in 50 stakeholders and leaders coming up with something called the CASA Compact, which really had 3 Ps: produce housing for all, preserve vulnerable housing that's at risk, and protect tenants. It also informed much of the state's 2019 housing legislation package. So it was a really impactful time and piece of work. We've now taken that concept and added to it things that are place-based and also people-based. So we talk and start our work with talking about promoting equity and inclusion. And I see that you had a panel scheduled with Richard Rothstein on the color of law. It looks like it got postponed, but that is a groundbreaking piece of work. And if you don't want to read the very, very long and researched book, he has a 17-minute video and a 7-minute video, and I highly recommend them. We also added in preventing displacement, really an approach to looking at neighborhoods, especially neighborhoods with communities of color and that are culturally historical, so we do not lose our cultural communities and our communities of color across California. So I'm just going to briefly walk through a couple of these and some of the strategies that you as a community, your policymakers, your elected officials, the folks that work in your planning department, your building department, and your community development department, and you as influencers and leaders, ideas that you can use as a framework to build on. So let's talk about the next slide, which is promoting equity and inclusion. And I'm glad that maybe I get to precede your panel on color of law. I think it's really important that a community as a whole, that you have a community-wide and policy-maker understanding of your history of land use and housing financing. And that's really understanding the national landscape, which of course is happened and duplicated here in California across our state. But we have a long history of housing policy and discriminatory zoning and discriminatory financial products that created systemic barriers and have resulted in really different patterns of home ownership and wealth creation. So they've not been equitable patterns of wealth creation at all. And it ripples through when you look at the Latino household income. Why is it lower? Because home ownership has been lower and there's been less money and resources to send kids to college and to take care of family emergencies. So addressing home ownership is one of the great equalizers that we can work on to equalize the access to wealth. And one of the strategies that we teach on is to implement corrective frameworks that are focused more not on equitable incomes. In other words, we're going to invest $1 million in this community and $1 million in this community and $1 million in this community on home ownership, but rather a focus on equitable outcomes. How do we raise the rate of Latino home ownership or Black home ownership or Native American home ownership to the average home ownership levels of a community? And I just want to show a quick slide, next slide if you will, some visuals on this. Oh, okay, actually, Ricardo, go one forward and we'll come back, sorry. Okay, maybe my visuals didn't get in there. Well, let's go back then, I'm sorry, to the produced housing for all. If we could go back to the produced housing for all. Thank you. So actually, I want to talk about the most impactful way to increase home ownership. And I'm going to talk on a couple of things and leave one to Jennifer Hernandez. Let's go to the produced housing for all slide. Great. So one of the things that the public sector can do and you can advocate for is to simply unlock public land and target its development with intentionality. And whether you have remnant sites next to road expansion or abandoned infill that maybe the city's picked up after the fires, but the public sector has lots of land, including the state of California has land in Sonoma as well, and the state's looking to put some of that land out for bid. So you can get involved in advocating what that land gets used for, that it get used for housing, in particular, that it gets used for home ownership and workforce rental housing and housing for our low-income populations. The second thing, and one of the most powerful places to be, is at any table where you talk about land use and to advocate for promoting greater density and housing types that can lead to less expensive paths to home ownership. So we've had two big bills in California, both of which have failed, SB 50 in 2019 and SB 1120 in 2020, that were both about adding more density to get more housing in next to transit and into single family neighborhoods. So some of the cheapest ways to increase home ownership are to build what we used to call granny flats and we now call accessory dwelling units or backyard cottages. But there's no land costs, there's just building costs, and it's generally one-story wood frame. And it's a great vehicle for promoting multi-generational home ownership to share in the cost of multiple buildings, but on one piece of land. Also advocating for more development of condos and townhomes, things that are less expensive that enable families to access entry-level homes. And last, having targeted strategies to equalize the levels of home ownership. So we don't all start out in the same place economically, but we all have the ability to end up there if the paths to opportunity are equal, focused on equal results, equal levels of Latino home ownership. And the third, and I'm going to leave this to Jennifer Hernandez, she's very eloquent on this, but is to really address the barriers faced by developers that drive up costs and increase their risk. That cost is passed on to the homeowner. And I just want to touch on a couple of others, and then I'm going to turn it back to Oscar. Slide, please. It's really important in this time to protect tenants and small landlords. Supervisor Gorin talked about the impact of COVID, the disproportionate impact of COVID on the Latino community. We've had the fires, we've had COVID. Our low-income families are very, very vulnerable, and it's important that we keep them housed and out of homelessness. At the same time, when they're unable to pay their rent, we put our small landlords also at risk, and we shouldn't be pitting tenants and landlords against each other. 80% of rental stock is small unit buildings owned by small landlords. So it's important to figure out, either through your philanthropic community or your local governments, or if we ever get more assistance from the federal government and some from the state, how to make sure you really target Latino tenants and keep them stable. And the last slide I want to talk about is preventing displacement and preserving vulnerable housing. So one of the things that happens because we've so undersupplied housing is that prices have gone up, and basically everybody is moving into neighborhoods that maybe they wouldn't live in before. So the workforce is moving into lower income neighborhoods, and lower income residents are often getting pushed out or into overcrowded conditions. So it's really important that we recognize the risk of displacement, and we put into place policies that prevent it or strengthen tenants and community members' abilities to stay. So there are things like first right to return when a building is torn down and new housing is put up. Things like inclusionary zoning, which guarantee some units for residents who've lived in the community. Another thing that's really important, and I know that through the fires you've lost homes and neighborhoods, and sometimes there are just vacant lots here and there. It's a great opportunity to target infill to entry-level home ownership and to strengthen those communities and get rid of blighted property, in particularly low-income communities. Empty sites, and now what we're going to see is more and more empty retail and commercial. That can lead to community deterioration, but it's also a great opportunity to seize the moment and convert the land use to allow housing and to build housing on it. And lastly, we've got to protect the housing that we have. It's so much more expensive to build. And so we've got to protect older renter properties, something we call naturally occurring affordable housing, things like mobile homes and farm worker housing in cities that have single room occupancy buildings, things like that. So I just want to leave you with those ideas. And again, we'll look forward to our dialogue together. Thank you, Oscar.
Thank you so much, Ms. Lazar, for bringing us that comprehensive oversight of what you believe are these critical determinants that are impeding home ownership in the Latino community and in socially economically disadvantaged communities. What I'd like to do next is introduce our next speaker, Ms. Jennifer Hernandez. She has practiced land use and environmental law for more than 30 years and leads Holland and Knight's West Coast Land Use Environmental Group. Her list of bona fides are extensive. She has been recognized as a top environmental litigator of the year in the San Francisco Bay Area by Best Lawyers. She received a California Lawyer of the Year award from the State Bar of California for her work in California's largest, most innovative land use and conservative agreement between her private landowner clients and 5 major environmental organizations, including the Sierra Club and the National Resources Defense Council. Ms. Hernandez is the longest serving minority board member of the California League of Conservation Voters. She was appointed by President Clinton to serve as a trustee for the Presidio National Park in San Francisco and serves on the board of directors for California Forward and Sustainable Conservation. Ms. Hernandez graduated with honors from Harvard University and Stanford Law. Ms. Hernandez is the daughter and granddaughter of steelworkers that were raised in Pittsburgh, California. She and her husband live in Berkeley and Los Angeles. Ms. Hernandez, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And I want to also just thank you for having this amazing organization focus on this very, very important topic. Of course, I'm just thrilled to be chairing this event with the supervisor, Jennifer, a long-term and long-time friend and colleague, and your other guests. My focus may be a little uncomfortable because I think one of the things that unites Californians is our love for California. It's not the easiest necessarily place to live, but boy, is it beautiful. And we do love it, and we're passionate about it. And we want it to be like it is. We want it to be a good place. We want it to work for our children. And we want it, I think, to be a more equitable place going forward than it was in the past. So these are shared values. And I think another shared value, at least that I was raised with from Mexican and Sicilian, not Italian, Sicilian relatives, is the notion of upward mobility. You work hard, you buy a house, and that is the way you achieve a level of stability and multi-generational wealth that helps you put kids through school, that helps you in your old age with your own medical needs, and that allows you to pass along wealth to launch the next generation. Home ownership is critical. And yet, I think it's really been quite recent that we've focused on home ownership. And I've done a fair amount now of civil rights litigation in the home ownership space, but in a little different perspective, because as I'm going to show you with a few slides, please bring them up. Unfortunately, for reasons that I think may be too much of our love for the California environment, we've allowed the environment to derail housing. Perfectly fine housing that's in existing neighborhoods, neighbors. And I want to share with you what that looks like. Not sure if you can get that screen up or whether you want me to share it myself. There we go. Thank you, Oscar. So Jennifer already talked about The Color of Law. Richard Rothstein is a dear friend, and told this shocking story of how well into really the 50s and 60s, California was intentionally redlining, precluding access to critical home ownership products like insured mortgages to communities of color. My Sicilian family certainly became homeowners long before my Mexican-American family. And that invidious sort of pattern was not accidental. It was a result of government policies that were enforced. There's some terrific work going on now at UC Berkeley about where and how California is resegregating by race. And purple areas, this is just the inner Bay Area, but purple areas are losing minority residents, and they're mostly leaving. They're leaving the region. They can't afford or find homes. They're in Stockton, my edge of Contra Costa County, just barely holding on to the eastern edge of the Bay. Pittsburgh and Antioch are large growth areas for African American and Latino, and it is relatively attainable for home ownership. But we're spinning out and truly ejecting from oftentimes historically ethnic neighborhoods, minority communities, and it's not even minority anymore, we're majority, because of high housing costs. And we've got high poverty rates because of high housing costs. And you can't shelter in place unless you've got a shelter. And we've got the nation's largest homeless population. And we've just created this housing catastrophe, and it's really been on our watch. I'm a baby boomer. This didn't happen when we were kids. A set of policies put in place, I think maybe, you know, with all the good intentions for sure, but then it started getting a little distorted. Can I get the next slide? And I should say that, you know, as a lawyer, in 49 states, there are huge fights about where to put housing, huge fights. And then the equivalent of a general plan is adopted, zoning is adopted, and there may still be huge fights and people may lose their office and get unelected and whatnot. But what doesn't happen in 49 other states is the need to re-demonstrate the absence of environmental impacts of a housing unit that completely complies with the general plan and the zoning code. If you end up with a single family lot and the zoning code allows you to build a home there or build a home in a granny flat, in every other state in the nation except California, that's something you get to do. You have to play by the rules, you have to follow zoning and general plans, follow the building codes. You can't be messing with endangered species or anything. But if you follow those rules, then you can build that home. And that's just not the case in California, because along about 1983, we weaponized the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, to allow it to be used against homes for the first time by case law, by judicial decision, against housing that complied with general plans and zoning. Nobody made that decision in the legislature. It was done by courts. And it was done as a result of lawyers fussing with each other, which is what we do for a living. Next slide. Very, very briefly, CEQA lawsuits can be filed anonymously. They're cheap. They're super complicated because we've got basically 100 essay questions. And if any of you know lawyers, or God forbid are a lawyer, you can't get 100% on an essay question if you're trying to deal with lawyers. We're trained to pick apart stuff. And that's what we do every single time we take a CEQA lawsuit to a judge. The judge picks it apart. And the picking apart results in very unpredictable outcomes, including about a 50% loss rate in CEQA lawsuits. This is not because, you know, local government is evil or developers have figured out how to like hypnotize local government into doing the wrong thing. It's because literally we have no certainty with CEQA. There are no clear rules. It's all just, I know it when I see it. And that's what we used to talk about mostly in law school, about obscenity. I know it when I see it. Unfortunately, in California, that's now true for housing projects. Once a lawsuit is filed, there's no financing available. So even if it has no merit, banks won't loan, grantees or grantors won't grant, and the housing stops. Next slide. This is really the, to me, most startling fact about CEQA. Everybody talks about it as kind of like this business versus enviros kind of thing or whatever. The biggest target of CEQA lawsuits statewide, and now I've done this study for 8 years running, the biggest target is residential housing, right? That's what people sue over. They're upset. The other two big targets, public services and infrastructure, the kind of gold corner on the left, and then down at the bottom, agency plans and regs. That's actually also housing. Those are density decisions made at the planning level for the purple, and they're decisions about how to increase transit or increase sewage treatment capacity or something. They're growth-related issues. Next slide. So we did a super, super deep dive into all CEQA lawsuits filed in the Los Angeles region, which is kind of like MTC. SCAG is the equivalent of MTC. They have extremely good data. And what we found is that over a 3-year period, 14,000 housing units were challenged. The majority, 70%, were located within a half a mile of frequent transit. This is what we say we want, but when you try to build housing in these locations, everybody knows, especially in areas that are wealthy, that more people are going to bring more kids to school, more families to the park, more traffic to the roads, and they just don't like it. And regardless of whether you play by the rules, general plan and zoning, you can get sued. And you can get sued over and over. We have 2 projects in LA that have been sued more than 30 times. That's 30 times. Next slide. So we don't want greenfields. The truth is we have about 3 million fewer homes than we need. And my parents, my grandparents, got to have starter homes, 900, 1,100 square feet, on lots that weren't anything until they were homes in Pittsburgh. We now have an ethic that says we can't build except in existing communities. That's, by the way, not a legal mandate. It's sometimes justified based on climate. 5.3 of the entirety of California is urbanized. You know that in York County. But the further truth is, it is better. It is more convenient to build inside existing communities. But 99% of the housing that was targeted in this 3-year period is in fact built inside existing communities. So the rumor that CEQA is used to stop projects on greenfields is false. The actual use of CEQA is to stop projects in your own neighborhood. And last slide. This to me is the worst. The tan colored areas are what Cal EPA, California Environmental Protection Agency, has mapped as environmental justice communities. These are locations where there are higher percentages of communities of color, incomes are lower, education attainment is lower, there's more pollution sources. These are not well-off communities. And they are disparately minority communities, communities of color. 78%, almost 80% of the challenged housing units, those lawsuits were filed in whiter, wealthier, and healthier parts of the region. And any of you who wonder at how it is that Marin County can continue to have almost no housing, period, how it has become a sundown town, which is a term used in the Deep South for towns that that prohibit even arrest a Black person after sundown. Fine to come in and do work during the day, but you better disappear at night. Places like Marin County have now embodied that very ethic. Progressive, democratic, environmental bastion Marin County has said no to housing more than any other county in California, even though it's the absolute closest to San Francisco. And the reason they do it, and the reason they appear to be able to get away with it decade after decade, is that they hide behind the term environment. I don't think that's a fair or appropriate or morally correct position for anyone in California to take. We all love the environment, but the environment should never be weaponized against communities of color disparately to actually forbid, make housing illegal, because you get sued, developer goes bust. And by the way, we didn't used to have developers, we just used to have just builders. The builders who used to be contractors, and contractors then became builders because they would buy a lot or two or throw right 3 or 5, and then they would put up some homes, and then those homes would be pretty affordable. That's how starter homes got created. Small scale contractors. Nobody small scale is set up to run a CEQA gauntlet, which means they have to be more expensive, more risk capital, and all of that cost just gets rolled into the cost of housing. So what can you do? There's no rule that exists in California that forbids your county and your communities from establishing what you already have under burn zone rules, which is a path through to rebuilding or building new housing that doesn't put you in this CEQA vortex. And that is, you can do design review all you want, but once you have general plan and zoning, you get to have the housing. The housing goes where it's supposed to go. And the community gets to absolutely have all the input it wants in design, but whether housing exists at all, how much density is allowed, those decisions are made at the general plan and zoning level. And we have a perfect opportunity, and I'll stop here, because we're about to update all housing elements virtually across the state based on the new regional needs assessment housing targets, which will assign each community the obligation to plan for and allow new housing. Set up that housing element so that it actually allows housing to be built, not just paper lots, by making it exempt. Not exempt as a matter of statute, but just the way you set up your code. You go, you get a building permit, subject only to design review. And that's my suggestion for your consideration. Thank you.
Well, thank you for laying that out for us, Ms. Hernandez. We have at least one question that came in on the presentation you were providing. In your view, and with the data that you presented to us, what's the balance that could be struck between legitimate environmental concerns in the building process and acknowledging those in the building process, and these other mechanisms and levers that you've mentioned in CEQA that don't really do that? Where do you see that balance?
Yeah, I really think that we need to return to kind of a rule of law approach in housing, and the law in housing is zoning and general plans. So environmental review should happen at the general plan zoning level, and not at the time when someone actually, God forbid, tries to build what's allowed. It happens at the plan level, environmental review, not at the project level. And that just makes sense. I mean, where are you going to put density? You shouldn't have that debate when somebody proposes something more dense. You should have that debate about what the boundaries of your downtown area are that you're going to allow for more density. You shouldn't wait to have that debate or have it yet again and again and again every time a project comes up. The example I just give is, if we use CEQA in our tax collection world, we would allow people with money, which is I think one of the questioner's points, to contest their tax bill every single time by suing the IRS. And half the time they'd win. What would happen? First off, we'd have no clue what kind of taxes we'd collect. Second, people who don't have the money to hire lawyers and fuss with stuff will end up paying less taxes. In this analogy for housing, people with housing have all the leverage in the world to just say no. They can file a CEQA lawsuit anonymously and just stop it for the whole market cycle sometimes. We had a house in Berkeley, unanimously supported by neighbors, planning commission, and the city council, held up in court for 11 years before being abandoned. Single family home. That is not about the environment, and that needs to stop.
Well, thank you so much for that, for responding to that question. Ms. Lasar, I want to touch upon or piggyback upon Ms. Hernandez's presentation that she provided about what I seem to understand there is that CEQA is one sort of new format of maybe creating a redlining process for housing. In your presentation, you provided as one of the 5 Ps promoting equity and inclusion. Do you consider that CEQA challenge as part of that, or is that something different?
You know, Jennifer's very compelling data on CEQA shows that the CEQA litigation is a barrier to building housing. And we certainly, you know, they are incrementally chipping away at that in the legislature, but it's one of the, you know, sort of third rails, and it's very contentious. There was a great bill by Senator Ana Caballero to take this sort of King Stadium CEQA exemption to residential projects that only have a $15 million sort of valuation. That's really really relevant in places like Fresno and Sonoma, where we don't have $100 million projects. But I think Jennifer also talked about, and I agree, the housing element process that's coming up is imperative that you participate in, and to the extent that we can get more by right development, right? So you as citizens weigh in on the big issues, your general plan, your specific plans, but we try and make individual project approvals a lot less discretionary. If you fit in the box, you get your building permit. And that's critical to being able to produce the level of housing we need in California. And I think the other thing that just Jennifer said, it's a great point. So, you know, one of the things that happens in communities of color is that the land use is often where the lower income communities live is often adjacent to non-residential land. It's often toxic land. It's where auto plating is and brownfields and all of those things. And so we've got to get our land use designations to be right and to not harm low-income communities so much. But again, by right development is going to really strengthen the ability to deliver the volume of housing we need, and it'll drive down costs.
A general question for both of you, if you'd like to address it. What effects, if any, do urban growth boundaries or similar urban limit lines have on affordable housing?
100% they constrain supply and increase costs. Unambiguous, absolutely proven time and time again. They also end up expelling communities of color who are priced out. So if you want to make a no-growth community purely white, you draw that color boundary really tight. And that's one of the many strategies employed by counties like Marin and Ventura. Another strategy, and Jennifer, I'll toss it back to you. You mentioned inclusionary housing, which really rolls the cost of, say, 2 out of 10 housing units, 20% inclusionary, rolls the cost of those 2 subsidized units into what the residents of the non-subsidized units have to pay. So it increases the cost of housing for those not receiving subsidized housing. So what happens if you say, I want only affordable, or I want 50% affordable? What happens is, unless there's taxpayer dollars, you get no housing at all. You get to close. This is classic Berkeley, by the way, where I live. You know, I only want affordable, or I want 40% affordable. What you then get is nothing except taxpayer funded affordable, which is very, very, very small. And you get to cloak yourself with this kind of social justice, I want housing for poor people, with a rule that prevents anyone from building housing. Jennifer, do I have that wrong?
Yeah, I mean, I have it not wrong. I have a different take on it, and it's not it's not in contradiction actually to what Jennifer says. I think there are many answers to that question on the urban growth boundaries. You know, wearing my good government hat for a minute, and I sat on our redevelopment board in San Diego for about 9 years prior to during the housing frothy time and through the beginning of the recession, and approved a lot of building permits and then extended a lot of them as that recession rolled in. But on the urban growth boundaries, you know, if you're on the government side, we just can't have endless sprawl. Government isn't wealthy enough to cover all the emergency services, all the roads and the maintenance. And so we've got to figure out how to make compact urban neighborhoods and areas around transit work from a development standpoint. And that does mean that we need to invest in the infrastructure and not pass that cost on necessarily to the developer and the end user, whether that's the renter or the homeowner. And so whether that's federal or local or state money, infrastructure investment is really critical to maintaining, not having to expand the urban limit line. On the second question about inclusionary, it's kind of funny because Jennifer and I think, are both pretty politically progressive, but I also think that we both come from a strong business sense. I used to be a developer, I used to be an investment banker. I believe that government can provide very good incentives to get developers to build. And I believe in density bonuses and parking reductions and all the things that we need to give to developers that we can basically give free if we control the land, or we control sometimes the density bonus process. And we should be using those tools as much as we can to get as much housing as we can get built. I mean, again, the goal isn't to pass the costs on to the end user. The goal is to maximize land use and to trade enhanced density for a package of public goods. And often that's inclusionary units, sometimes it's parks, sometimes it's affordable home ownership, sometimes it's affordable rental. The government needs to be trained to be very, very good negotiators in this realm.
Well, thank you both very much for sharing all your thoughts. We have, as you can imagine, a lot of questions, but we also have another panel that's coming up. So we do appreciate your time. We will make the slides that both Ms. Hernandez and Ms. Lazar provided here today available to everybody. And Cien will be having further housing related programs. So I'm pretty sure we will be collecting these questions that we did not answer and continue to present them and work to present programs that address that. But for now, we thank Ms. Lazar, we thank Ms. Hernandez for your expertise and your time and your thoughts. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Buenas noches.
Buenas noches. Well, folks, we'd like to take a little stretch break as I read through the introduction of the next panel. Feel free to do so. But I do want to get us moving because this panel is also of great importance, and I want to give it its due time. So let me start off by saying that we will be discussing bridging the gap in the digital divide. And a few weeks ago, Cien presented a program focused on issues related to this new frontier, which is the virtual classroom. And in that program, we had 3 superintendents, one from Santa Rosa City Schools, Sonoma Valley Unified School District, and the Roseland School District, which instructs a great proportion of the Latino students from K through 12 in Sonoma County. And as we spoke about the various issues that they were facing in this virtual setting, the predominant thorn on the side was the unreliability of broadband access, or in its worst case, the lack thereof. It is here in which the current COVID pandemic has expressed its most punitive effects on those who cannot afford broadband access or are geographically removed from it altogether. Left to its own devices, we believe market players have done a mediocre job at best at bridging this digital divide. In today's world, broadband access symbolizes a lifeline into a greater community and the realm of opportunities that can no longer exist or be experienced in a shelter-in-place world. So Cien believes that a disproportionate amount of those impacts in this manner will be found in the Latino and socioeconomically disadvantaged communities. And we'd like to explore that with these speakers. And as we do that, I'd like to just leave you with that image that went viral not so long ago of those two little girls that were trying to do their schoolwork over in Salinas right next to a Taco Bell because that's all that they had. So with that in mind, what I want to do here today is introduce to you three distinguished panelists who will frame this broadband issue and identify those detrimental factors increasing this divide and propose alternatives to closing the gap. First I will introduce Ms. Marta Guzman Aceves. She is a commissioner with the California Public Utilities Commission. She was appointed as a commissioner at the CPUC by Governor Edmund Brown in 2016. She has focused on issues related to fuel switching, broadband access, water affordability, access to distributed solar, and various other energy and telecommunications issues. She previously served as Deputy Legislative Affairs Secretary for the Office of the Governor since 2011. She was a Sustainable Communities Program Director for the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation from 2005 and 2011. In 2010, she also co-founded Communities for a New California, a charitable organization promoting increased civic engagement of underrepresented communities. Ms. Guzman Aceves earned a master's degree in agricultural and resource economics from the University of California, Davis, and a Bachelor of Science in International Economics from Georgetown University. And before I turn the floor and the mic over to Ms. Guzman Aceves, I just want to lay out the framework for this portion of the panel. Ms. Guzman Aceves is going to provide us an overall viewpoint of this digital divide from the state's perspective. We will have another speaker who I will introduce next when he comes on, which is Mr. Calvin Sandin. He is a broadband analyst for Economic Development Board for the County of Sonoma. When I introduce him, he will be speaking about local issues related to broadband. And lastly, we will present Mr. Omar Carrera, CEO with the Canal Alliance, to give us his individual perspective of what he has done with his organization in that space. So, Ms. Guzman Aceves, the floor is yours.
Muchas gracias y buenas noches a todos los de Sonoma. Thank you very much for having me here. Let's see, this light is a little right there. Thank you for inviting me. It really is great. I'm glad I got to get a little bit of a sense of the dialogue that you offer all of the community there in Sonoma. It's really refreshing to know that everyone is getting involved in such critical issues. I'm going to share a little bit of a PowerPoint, but I want to just tell you guys there's two messages that I have for you. The first is, if we want to get universal broadband to our children and to all of our families, really, we all need it. We need a new federal administration, and I'm going to explain why. And the second point is, we need a much bigger role for local government. And I'll give you a couple of examples of that, including the leadership that's been taking place in Monterey County and the city of Salinas with the situation with the kids there as well. So let me share a screen here. Okay. And let me just get it out to the big picture. Okay. So this is a picture of a snapshot of the county, and I used a level of speed that is 25 megabits down and 3 up. And I'm sure Calvin will get into more details on all of this, but you know, the governor just issued an executive order a couple weeks ago that says the goal is really 100 down, and really we want it to be 100 symmetrical for what we need, particularly if there's more than, you know, 2 kids at home, especially if there's more than one family in the home. But this gives you a sense of some of the holes that exist in the community. And even in the areas that look pretty green, there's holes within them. But it's a big snapshot for you here. Okay, so let me get to this point about why, unfortunately, I believe that we need, I shouldn't say unfortunately, but why we need a new federal administration. And under Obama, in 2015, this issue of the internet certainly there's a lot of things that come out this, so I'm oversimplifying this, but essentially under Obama, in some part due to the discussion over net neutrality, in large part, Obama's FCC said the internet is a telecommunication service. And what that meant inherently is that some of the protections that we've established for a very long time for a voice service, like we have a Lifeline program. I don't know if many of your maybe elderly parents or family members receive a subsidy to have their phone at an affordable rate. That's the Lifeline program. There's certain requirements that you have to meet in terms of your quality of service and your outages and all of that. All that body of law and regulation comes with being called a telecommunications service. So fast forward to the Trump election, and then the new SEC chairman, Chairman Pai, and his order was in large part due to get around the issue of net neutrality. But as a part of that, it was a much bigger act. And he said that, I shouldn't say action, it wasn't any sort of legislation, it was a regulation. He declared essentially, he classified the internet as an information service. He said it's not a telecommunication service, it's an information service. And therefore that is outside of the jurisdiction of the FCC and goes over to the FTC. And in fact, there's no regulation there. So needless to say, this has resulted in a lot of litigation. A lot currently in the DC circuit, there's some ambiguity and some pathways for us to pursue potentially some areas of jurisdiction at the state level, very limited, potentially some still at the FCC, but also very limited. And so we obviously know with great sadness what we are now faced with at the courts. And really what we need is we need congressional action and we need a new president and we need an FCC if we want to consider internet an essential utility. And if at least, even if we don't want to go as far as saying it's an essential utility, if we at least want to consider it a telecommunication service, that's kind of the issue that we want. And one thing with that I know has, I mean, I can't even tell you this. This actually came up in the Monterey, in the Salinas conversation. There's a farm worker camp at the edge of Salinas called San Gerardo. And, you know, they have an old AT&T landline that just has the phone, and they have expensive satellite to serve them. And it's not fast enough, and so when they gave the kids hotspots, the kids couldn't connect. Anyway, there's no obligation from the internet service companies to serve. That obligation, the carrier of last resort, you know, that protection that was in place for voice is not there for the internet. So again, these are all these constructs. There's a lot of deregulation that happened a few decades ago, including in California. And some of that has been restored in California, but not at the federal level. And so we're dealing with a really weak regulatory construct for this. And the answer has been, let the market solve it. And as you know very well, for areas like Sonoma that have kind of these not really dense areas, the market hasn't solved it. And even within urban areas, the market hasn't solved it. So we have a lot of Californians, over 50% of Californians only have one provider. Okay. All right, so this is just a little bit more background, and I'm going to give Oscar the slides so he can send them over to you guys. And I did want to share that because we're kind of stuck with this issue, this last bullet here, that we can't force the incumbents to do something. We need to incentivize them to do things. We have these programs that we try to incentivize, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And essentially what the new realization is, from my perspective, is no longer should I be focused on what AT&T or Comcast or Frontier, what do you need to serve, you know, this part of Roseland or this part of Forestville or wherever. No, what we want to say is Sonoma, Santa Rosa, what do you need to build out this infrastructure to create more competition on top of that? And so that's a very distinct question, and local governments have a big role there, and you're going to hear from your local government later. But I will just touch a little bit about some of our, what we call our public purpose programs, which are our incentive programs that you and I pay on our cell phone bill and our landline bill, but most of it comes from our cell phone bill. There's a state surcharges that pay for these programs. And just to highlight, there's one new program to try to help tribes. Okay, so this is a very, very full slide, but you'll have it for your reference. And it's just a very brief summary of all the different programs that we have to try to subsidize carriers to do more service. I'm going to highlight a couple. Number one, the California Advanced Service Fund. This is our infrastructure funding. And you'll hear probably today, there are applicants from Sonoma, and there's some really great ambitious ones about other providers coming in to serve this need. And that's obviously not an overnight solution, but something that's very critical. And then I'm gonna skip over to number 6, the California Lifeline Program. And one of the other things I hope you can, we can follow up and engage with you on is that in a couple of weeks, on October 8th, we're going to approve a program change to this program, which will create a subsidy for broadband, which means that we will, the math depends on the service, but let's say just as an example here, we'll have about $15 to $20 for a carrier to receive from the state to provide broadband to the home. And that should be for free. Based on the cost that some of the incumbents charge today for their affordable plans, they should be able to pass that for free. So this is a little bit of description of what this proposal is. And, you know, maybe you guys have heard of the Obama phone. The California Lifeline Program has been the state side of funding for that. There's a state and a federal side of funding for the Lifeline Program overall. And mostly we've traditionally, or for the last maybe 10 years, we've been paying for the cell phones, which is a great service. And now we're saying, okay, those cell phones need to have more data. And in addition to making the offer for the cell phones, we need to give people the ability to get a subsidy for broadband, theoretically enough to cover it for free. But that's going to depend on the carriers participating. These are the existing voluntary offerings, we call them offerings, low income plans that the carriers have on their own. And there's a lot of issues with these. One, they don't promote them. They make it pretty difficult to sign up, but they do exist. And what we're trying to do with the Lifeline program is merge these so that basically we can get these for free for the lowest income community households. Especially we want to target the ones with kids that need it the most. So the big thing is we cannot obligate AT&T, Charter, Comcast, any of these, we can't obligate them to participate. We're going to have to work together to say to them, here's the money from the state. Let's make it happen. Let's sign them up. So that's going to be a big role for you. And then this is an additional rulemaking that we just kicked off, again, as a result of the executive order, where the governor also is saying we need to try more things, new things. And one of the exciting things that we're looking at here again is how do we help local governments build out this fiber infrastructure so that they can then, you guys can lease it out to carriers to come in and serve it. There's no longer going to be a lack of infrastructure. And we also want to optimize working with our IOUs, our PG&E in your case, when they're rebuilding, when they're hardening, go out there and add the conduit, add the fiber. So those are the goals of this proceeding. There's a lot of work to be done, but a focus of ours is how to really build the capacity of local governments so that all community members are served. Okay, so that's it. And I will share this slide, as I said, but 2 key takeaways I really want you guys to have is, again, the critical nature of having an administration that views this as a utility that needs to be available to everyone. And unfortunately, that leadership is not there currently with this Trump administration. And secondly, that there is another option here for the long sustainable needs of the community, and that is a role, just like other infrastructure, water, sewer, transport, roads. Local government has a role here, and we at the commission are ready to help try to figure that out with you.
Well, thank you so much, Commissioner Guzman Aceves, for providing us that valuable information, and for really like breaking down the sort of the intricacies of how change would have to come about if we wanted to start thinking about broadband as a public good. So we appreciate that. We're going to have some questions and answers in a bit, but we're going to move now to Mr. Calvin Sandin, who is a broadband analyst at the Sonoma County Economic Development Board, where he also manages the Sonoma Mendocino Economic Development District and manages the North Bay North Coast Broadband Consortium. Mr. Sandin graduated from California Polytechnical State University in 2017 with a degree in economics and financial management, where he was also a student athlete participating in Division I football as an offensive lineman. Right on. He has lived in rural West Sonoma County, so he knows the struggles about this without adequate internet access his entire life, and is passionate about closing the digital divide and ensuring everyone has access to fast, affordable, reliable internet access and technology. Mr. Sandin, the floor is yours.
Hey, thank you guys. My name is Calvin Sandin, and I work at the Economic Development Board as a department analyst. And a lot of my work involves just working on any and all projects related to broadband expansion, and making sure that everyone has access to internet. And as far as the presentation slides, were you managing or should I share my screen?
If you'd like to share your screen, you can. Otherwise, let me know and we can share it.
Okay. Beginning. Can you see this if I am sharing it?
We are not seeing anything
okay.
right now. Let me give it a try on my end.
Okay. And so we also have this group called Access Sonoma Broadband, which is a grassroots organization where we have community members from all across the county, including internet service providers, public agencies, unserved communities, anyone that is interested in broadband expansion, where we all come together and discuss issues just related to broadband. And we also we are also a member county in the North Bay North Coast Broadband Consortium, which is a CPUC funded organization. And with that organization, we have members that include Mendocino, Napa, Marin, and Sonoma County, where we also have an oversight committee governed by our board of supervisors from each county. Next slide, please. So I like to start off these presentations with a little broadband 101, because when I first started as an intern in 2017 with Economic Development Board, I knew pretty much nothing about broadband, and then now I know a little too much. So just please be patient while we go through a few terms so you are familiar with kind of what is broadband, and we can go to the next slide. So what is broadband? Well, according to Wikipedia, broadband is high-speed data transmission that is designed for permanent stationary use on various technology devices. Broadband can be transmitted over fiber, cable, DSL, and fixed wireless technologies. As far as fixed wireless, if you are in a community that is rural or urban, and you have an antenna on your house and it is shooting over to a wireless tower, which ultimately connects you to the internet, that is an example of fixed wireless. When we are looking at fiber, cable, DSL technologies that are, where the internet is transmitted over wireline, good representation is the image in the bottom right corner. It'll show you the differences in the technologies, the wireline technologies. And you see the little red line to the far left. that is an example of the capacity that dial-up internet has. And as we move further right, we move into DSL and then into cable, and you finally can see on the far right the capacity that fiber has. And it is fiber is extremely impressive as far as the capacity that it can provide. Imagine you have the whole Game of Thrones series, and what would take you maybe a year to download over dial-up, you can download it in minutes with a fiber connection. Now, as far as what defines broadband, well, the FCC defines broadband as an internet connection with a download speed of 25 megabits per second and an upload speed of 3 megabits per second. And the California legislation, AB 1665, defines broadband as 6.1. Megabits per second, how fast you can upload or download something, which is the 25 megabits, and how fast you can upload something, which is the 3 megabits per second. And so each technology that you use, whether it's fixed wireless or wireline, will determine what quality of internet you are getting. And I remember sitting in this California Department of Food and Agriculture board meeting one time where Commissioner Guzman was presenting, and sorry if I misquote you a little bit, but it was something like, we use these definitions of 6.1 to identify the most unserved communities that may only have access to technology such as dial-up or satellite, but that does not mean that the grant agencies are funding 6.1 service. Their goal is gigabit, speeds that are capable of providing that 100 that she spoke of earlier. So next slide, please. And there are some other terms. Dark fiber is unused optical fiber that has been laid but is not currently being used. Last mile, where imagine that you are out in rural West County or East Sonoma County, and you have the main the main roads such as River Road, but you live on these series of streets going back into the redwoods where you do not have access to technology on River Road. You are at this last mile community, and then middle mile are examples of the main roads where such as 101 or going out towards Highway 1 and those areas. And then we of course are familiar with the concept of the digital divide. Internet service providers, AT&T, Comcast, Frontier, Sonic, Charter, these competitive wireline companies. And then we have wireless internet service providers, Verizon, Vista, Motec, CDS, Web Perception, Black Mountain, CDS is in there twice, Anderson Valley ISP, Vista is in there twice as well. Finally, broadband speeds, a unit of data size or network speed. So how fast you can upload or download something. And then broadband data, how much data or how big is that file size that you are downloading. And then bandwidth. A good example of bandwidth is if you're on a freeway and you're in the Petaluma Narrows, the bandwidth there during high traffic is not very good. But if when it's finally expanded to a four-lane highway, we'll be moving pretty well. So at home, having multiple users on a connection, you want to make sure that you have that high capacity internet connection like fiber, so that no one in your family drops off with Zoom calls during meetings like this. Next slide, please. Now, broadband and economic development. Why is broadband important to economic development? Well, as we all know, broadband is no longer a luxury. It is a necessity. We all need access to this service that we rely on in the 21st century that allows us to compete. And it benefits all industries, public safety, healthcare, education, agriculture. tourism, public agencies, and it helps just improve operating efficiency, job creation, retention, investment in local economy, business attraction support, entrepreneurship and technology, quality of life, property values, equity and equal opportunity. And so it really is an important concept for economic development and focusing resources towards it. Next slide, please. Now, when I was brought on in 2017, my initial project was to work on creating a broadband strategic plan, and we contracted, the Economic Development Board contracted with Magellan Advisors, which is a nationally reputable consultant. And we did a survey of the entire county, the supervisorial districts, the communities, the internet service provider, conducting interviews with cities and public agencies and internet service providers. And the ultimate goal was just to identify all opportunities, the current status of the county, and where we currently lie. And looking at that, the map that Commissioner Guzman had shown, as you look to see where folks are served and not served, the closer we are to the main roads, such as 101 or River Road, the neighbors that are adjacent to those main roads are the ones that are generally have access to the internet. But as we move further and further away, that's where the infrastructure begins to be lacking, and we have the greater portions of unserved households. Right now, just based on data that we've collected from and assessed with Chico GIC, there are, at the 6.1 level of 6 download and 1 upload, there are 4,534 households that are unserved or have no service. As we move up to a higher speed standard of 25.3, that number increases to 6,918 households that are unserved or have no service. And as we move up just a little bit farther to 25.25, we have 9,684 households that are unserved. And as we had spoken earlier, the goal is 100-100. That is the level of, or higher, as the level of survivability for us to compete in today's society. And as far as the strategic plan, after all of this data collection and assessing everything going on in Sonoma County, our consultant worked with us to create a list of recommendations for how Sonoma County can move forward. If you move to the next slide, please. And these are some of the recommendations that were included in the strategic plan. 1, appoint a Sonoma County lead county-wide advisory board consisting of county, city, and industry officials to lead and coordinate implementation of the broadband strategic plan. Create a database of publicly owned assets, towers, buildings, parks that could be used to locate broadband facilities. 3, develop a broadband infrastructure program leveraging municipally owned assets to meet needs and demands of agencies and benefit the greater community. Formalize broadband-friendly policies, procedures, and regulations, and incorporate best practices into community projects, including roads, water, sanitation, and parks. Work proactively with telecom providers to construct high-quality and resilient wireless communication systems to facilitate emergency communications throughout the county. Work collaboratively with telecom providers to expand and deploy broadband infrastructure to service rural and underserved areas. Consider options to fund broadband expansion to rural areas, including grants, public-private partnerships, and special tax districts. Consider constructing a publicly owned broadband infrastructure system connecting county and other municipal facilities as part of recovery and resiliency programs. And then hire a full-time county employee dedicated to the coordination of all activities between federal, state, county, city, unincorporated areas, as well as industry officials necessary for the broadband strategic plan implementation process. So where we are now, we have this plan, this list of recommendations, and we are working through implementing each of these recommendations. And one of the priority recommendations EDB, Economic Development Board, is exploring is this concept of municipal broadband. in looking at broadband as another public good, similar to water or electricity or sewage, that the county and cities and public agencies can really make an impact in closing the digital divide by taking on ownership and governance of broadband infrastructure and services. Next slide, please. Oops. Yeah, there we go. So the benefits of municipal broadband. So this concept is if they can't build it, we can build it ourselves. In areas where the private sector is not, not capable of, deploying infrastructure and services, because maybe it's not that it's not profitable, but it's not profitable enough for a private sector company to do it. That is where a community can come together through various municipal broadband models, such as a utility district or a local government or a nonprofit, ways that the community can come together and optimize costs wherever possible to get the work done and get their community connected. And this concept of municipal broadband is it's already occurring across the nation. Over 500 municipalities have invested in creative public networks using a variety of models to connect rural and underserved communities. And there have been cases where it hasn't been successful, but we are learning on how to make it successful. And there are plenty of successful cases across the country. It really depends on making sure that you take into consideration everything that is right for a community before deploying it, so that you do it correctly. And then the benefits of it: municipal broadband. The telecommunications industry is a $1.7 trillion industry, and the idea of a public entity getting involved in this industry, it can be sustainable if, as you are providing a new service, it can create a business model that is sustainable so that it can compete with or create competition among the private sector. But, and so there are a variety of different funding methods to build broadband networks without direct taxpayer dollars, such as grants, revenue bonds, loans, or tax increment financing. And the infrastructure can be publicly governed by folks that are, or by groups that are focused on making sure that the communities are getting exactly what they need, rather than focusing on profit. But municipal broadband also has the benefit of public-private partnerships. It can still support the private sector community, business community, and looking for opportunities to help them expand as well. Take, for example, an open access model. An open access model is a model where you have, you deploy one section of infrastructure that connects a group of homes, and rather than the single provider model where you may only have access to the company that owns that infrastructure, you could partner with, if a public entity owned it where they had an open access model, they could provide access to multiple internet service providers on this one infrastructure. So you, as an end consumer, you would go into this portal and you could have access not just to one, not just to two, but you could have access to several different internet service providers and their services that they provide. There are long-term benefits to a community, even beyond improved internet access. I spoke earlier of the potential of the revenue. Revenue, as the community is spending money on their internet, rather than it going to these large corporations, that that concept of buy local, that revenue can get reinvested back into the community. Access necessary for job growth and economic development. I spoke about that earlier. Fiber utilities can drastically improve utility efficiency and city cost savings. Fiber can help with water monitoring, with SCADA networks. It can help with monitor electricity and those various services. Locally owned networks are committed to local success. making sure that the communities get what they need. And then lastly, helps ensure services are fast, affordable, and reliable, that we can accomplish, as communities come up and they say, hey, my internet's not fast enough, we can prioritize that, making sure that everybody has affordable options. And lastly, making sure that our networks are reliable so that in times where there are power outages or cuts in the fiber, that we can keep our network up and running so that there are no drops in communication. Next slide, please. Now, how can you help? And in terms of what this all means for the Latinx community, I am constantly trying to find opportunities to help different projects. So as I said, I work on all different fronts, but I've been working with City of Santa Rosa, Rafael Rivero on projects with the Salvation Army and SRJC on trying to find ways to help the Latinx community get connected and identify any issues that they're experiencing. Some of the biggest issues I have seen are not on the infrastructure access. Take Roseland, for example, where the community may have access to internet or wireline, but there are other issues such as adoption, where the affordability of services is an issue, or the lack of accessibility to technology is an issue. So that is where we can work closely with community-based organizations and public agencies and other organizations to get the community the resources they need, such as the Sonoma County Library. They started a program about a year ago called Sonomify, which if you have a library card, you can check out the internet for free for 2 weeks, and it's how I use the internet at home, and it works pretty good. It works off of a Verizon network. So if you have Verizon service in your area, you can get the internet for free if you have a library card. And then other organizations such as Sonoma County Office of Education, working to make sure that all students have access to technology and affordable internet. But other areas that we can expand resources into the Latinx community is really just putting more focus on broadband and ways that we can collaborate, such as just attending these Access Sonoma broadband meetings that we hold quarterly. And if you are interested in attending, please reach out to me, and I can add you to the distribution list. Become a broadband champion and volunteer. Each community that is unserved or facing issues, there's always one person that speaks up and say, hey, I want to help my community and get them the services that they need. We rely on those individuals to help out. Identify unserved or underserved areas. Anywhere that does not have access, it helps me if you reach out to identify these areas. Conduct home community speed tests to test the speed that you are currently experiencing through your internet service provider, to know whether or not it's fast, reliable, or fast or reliable. And then research and educate yourself in the telecom industry. I started by just Google News, putting on broadband, and learning everything about it. And so it really helps to research the industry. Community-based organization broadband projects, and share available broadband resources, low income offerings, Sonomify, technology programs. The internet service providers try and do a great job at offering low income plans, such as Sonic and Comcast and AT&T. And last slide, please. Final thoughts. Again, I do believe in the concept of our community just thinking differently, thinking than we have in the past. This private sector model has not, it has done a lot of great things for our economy. It's resulted in a lot of innovation and getting us to where we are today. At the same time, we have hit this point of a crisis where the private sector model has not solved the digital divide to where we want it to be, where we have to be thinking differently and supporting new concepts that are innovative. And I think that municipal broadband and turning broadband into a public good, that way we can the cost to deploy internet has become extremely expensive. And it's not just from the internet service provider's standpoint of operation, where we are paying CEOs millions of dollars. It's also on the construction side, where the cost to construct for a private sector company to do it, it's become expensive. So trying to find ways to optimize all costs possible through a public model is how I believe we can, a public or not-for-profit model is how I think we can solve this digital divide, ensuring that everyone has access to fast, affordable, and reliable internet. So please reach out to me if you have any questions or want to get engaged. I'm really interested in meeting you and working together.
Thank you so much, Calvin, for providing us that insight into what the county efforts are doing at this point to try to bridge that digital divide. The last panelist that I want to present, last but not least, of course, is Mr. Omar Carrera. He is the CEO of Canal Alliance in Marin County. In 2016, Mr. Carrera was named the CEO of this organization, well respected in Marin County. We've known each other or known of each other for many, many years. It's a nonprofit dedicated to helping the Latinx and immigrant community break the cycle of poverty. As an Ecuadorian immigrant himself, Omar learned from dedicated parents and grandparents the value of hard work, and that coming to the U.S. was about seizing opportunity and not taking handouts. Mr. Carrera earned several certificates in nonprofit management and leadership from Harvard, Stanford, and San Francisco State. And he volunteers in all that he does. He still volunteers to be a soccer coach with his son. What we want Mr. Carrera to do for us here is explain to, or to provide to the viewership an example of how a nonprofit organization has worked in this broadband space to try to bridge that gap. So I'll leave the floor to you, Mr. Carrera.
Gracias, Oscar. Buenas noches, Sonoma. The irony of the whole thing is that I was going to talk about the digital divide, and I just lost the internet 10 minutes ago. And I was afraid I need to connect through my phone, but the internet came back. I live in Sundown Town, and definitely the digital divide has been an issue that we had. Definitely with this government, but it's not new. We have been having this problem for a long time. So I'm going to just tell briefly our journey that we took to fix the digital divide in the canal. I started my advocacy journey to solve the digital divide in the canal 15 years ago. My first job at Canal Alliance was as a technology instructor. This role allowed me to better understand how deep and wide the digital divide was in the canal. I decided to educate community leaders that the digital divide was not only limited to access to a computer or knowledge of how to use that computer, but also the fact that people didn't have access to reliable and affordable internet. I thought that in doing so, common sense will do the rest. To my surprise, I realized that common sense is neither common nor sense. I knew that the digital divide is a global problem, but in one of the richest counties in the country, in a neighborhood that was surrounded by infrastructure, it was a very troubling situation. Reliable and affordable internet access is not just a basic and fundamental service. It's a tool to enhance public safety, civic participation, public health, education, and preparation for natural disasters. In 2018, I was able to create a network made up of leaders from the business community, educators, health professionals, law enforcement, city and county employees, and elected officials who understood the potential. We gained momentum in the last 2 years, but it was COVID-19 and the adoption of distant learning that gave the final push. Local government decided to change the role from participant to leader. They put together a team of consultants to design a community Wi-Fi network. Suddenly, what seemed impossible began to happen. Quickly, the city and the county were able to resolve issues related to funding, technology limitations, and government bureaucracy. The network will have the capacity to help 2,000 students and adults in the canal. The community Wi-Fi network is managed by the Marine Information and Data Access Systems Network. This network has 25 access points. They are connected to streetlights and properties at Canal Alliance. The network is not a complete solution. The permanent solution is the government intervention to help finance and monitor pipelines online. I was previously the case for essential services like the telephone lines and electricity. Big companies control the internet pipelines and charge us to get access to them. They don't have any incentive to build affordable internet everywhere. Our elected officials know that. I know it's a big battle and it requires a federal government intervention, but local governments can do something about it. We do have few opportunities to take advantage of things that happen around us. The smart train was one of them. 5G was another one. And we let pass those opportunities. We could have leveraged the resources to those projects to secure affordable and reliable internet to our communities. Because our communities have no representation in those negotiation tables, our pain always is ignored. Thank you for the invitation, Oscar. Happy to answer any questions. I know everybody is tired now, but it was great to be here.
No, well, thank you, Omar, for sharing that collaborative effort, because in hearing Commissioner speak and Mr. Sandin speak, what I was taking away from those conversations was that, one, federal government will not do anything until there's a regime change, or at least a change enough to bring this issue back to the right agency to address it. And two, until that happens, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and figure it out ourselves on how best to do that. And you provided us with a very concrete example of how to do that, and we appreciate and applaud your efforts for doing so. What I want to do in these closing moments is to give each one of you at least like a 30-second spot for each to let us know what do you think would be time best spent in trying to bridge that digital divide in our local community. What should we start doing? That's the 30 seconds, and we'll start with the commissioner, and then we'll move on.
Thank you. Well, I would say build on what both Omar and Calvin are doing, because they're actually building the right building blocks. So engage with them, support them, engage us in our resources. And that's the more longer term sustainable solution. Second, in the interim, let's keep those incumbents, those internet service providers accountable, and let's make them participate in these lifeline programs where they will be able to provide free internet to the low-income households in Sonoma County and the state. So not just Sonoma. So those,
thank you, Kim. Oh, sorry.
No, well, thank you very much for inviting me, and please do not hesitate to reach out. But thank you very much.
I appreciate, we do appreciate you making the time. Calvin, your final thoughts.
To support the CPUC's efforts, and which would ultimately support Sonoma County, there's a speed test app called CalSpeed. Please download that and run a speed test at your home, and have others push it out to identify which areas are unserved and who doesn't have access to internet. And then as far as other issues accessing the internet, please reach out to me and let me know what issues your community is facing, and we can work together to try and find a solution. And if you know of any non-profit or community-based organizations that are looking to take on kind of this idea of governance over a broadband program, please connect me with them as well.
We will do our best to do that. Now, Calvin, thank you so much for your time. Omar, same question to you. What do you see at least as your next steps? And you've done a great job already, but what do you see next?
A couple things, you know, Latinos had to stop organizing lunches and had to put to work to change things. They are affecting our communities, right? That's one. The second one is put your elected officials to work, or change your elected officials. Very simple. When we talk about that we have systemic issues. When we talk about that we have a racist system, let me break down in a very simple way that system. The system includes policymakers, policies, and people that vote for those policymakers. So if we talk about that we have a systemic problem, that is the problem in all those three. So we need to make sure that you get to know your elected officials well before you vote for them. November is an important election, not just at the national level, at the local level. The decisions that they make affect your life daily. So make sure you get to know your elected officials. Ask the question about how important is resolving the digital divide for low-income communities, how serious they are. They had to show you in the budget they're making investments. They had to create an environment to create incentives for the private sector to participate. And we need to be in charge. The private sector is a player in this space. It's not the decider who has access to internet and who doesn't. Thank you again.
Thank you all very much, Commissioner Guzman Aceves and Mr. Sandin. Mr. Carrera, thank you so much for joining our panel. We're going to distribute the information you provided to us, and we'll leave the channels open for further discussions and further programs with all of you. Thank you for joining us. So, and in wrapping up this panel, everyone, thank you so much for your patience and staying with us on a Thursday night. What I want to state again, which is what Mr. Carrera just stated for us, is these housing issues that we've been talking about, these broadband issues that we've been talking about, require political initiative. You know, this inertia of just waiting for a big election every 4 years to make change is not going to help us get there. I mean, yes, there are elections that are coming up that are these high impact elections, and we need to take them seriously. But change happens at the ground level, and we need to pay attention to those ground level issues, because that's where we can start seeing a difference if we get involved. And that's what this program was all about, to provide you with options and solutions and different ways of thinking about at least two subject matters, housing and broadband internet access, so that you yourself can get up and, as a call to action, start thinking about, what can I do to make that difference? What can I do? And if you're part of an organization, what can my organization do to bridge that gap or to provide better housing options? Because as you could heard from all the speakers, yes, there's a federal system and there's laws on top of there that move and make changes, but they move at a glacier pace. And so our job is to recognize that and still strive for that, but acknowledge that if we want to make incremental change that has a greater impact on our daily lives, we start in our neighborhood, the local level. And so we encourage everyone to get out and vote. Cien is going to have a voting program on October 8th. We're also going to be collaborating with a housing youth town hall on housing issues on October 1st with Generation H. So October 1st, Generation H housing panel, October 8th, a pre-election discussion. Please join us again. Thank you so much for your time. And as always, Cien appreciates your friendship with us and joining us in these wonderful discussions. Everyone have a great night, and thank you.